All right, I have 9 o'clock. So hello, good morning. Welcome to the Summer Climate Outlook webinar for South Central Texas. And yes, I will be recording this presentation, posting it to YouTube and sending that out along with the slides to our partners list sometime later today. So before we talk about the outlook into summer, as usual, let's take a quick look back at the last few months. Meteorological spring, March, April, and May was a top 5 warmest spring on record for much of our area, including the tied for the second warmest spring in Austin. And that was largely on the heels of the warmest May on record for a good portion of South Central Texas. The drier than normal conditions also persisted. Bexar County, for example, saw its 5th driest spring on record with an average precipitation of only 2 3/4 inches. And that was a pretty widespread story across a good chunk of South Central Texas through the spring. In terms of the number of 90-degree days, it was also top 5 all time, and really the most since the memorable spring and summer of 2011. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a moment. Some areas only saw about 2 inches of rain over that 3-month period, including northern Atascosa and southern Bexar counties, and a few other scattered areas. Deficits in portions of the Hill Country and the San Antonio metro area through that 3-month period were really up to 7 inches. So even though we did get a couple of days of some beneficial rains, not everybody saw those rains, and certainly it wasn't enough nearly anywhere in our area. And here's just a quick map made by Brian Bretschneider, a climatologist in Alaska, showing what's really a continued La Nina pattern of much warmer than normal temperatures, the warmest on record for a good portion of South Central Texas, cooler in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, even where it wasn't a record warm May, it was certainly in the top 5. And those trends have really continued, as we all know, into the first half of June with a number of 100-degree days across our area. Looking at rainfall, percent of normal over the past 90 and 180 days, they look really similar. Most areas have had a distinct lack of rainfall. Much more than half of our area has seen less than half of the usual rainfall over the past 3 and 6 months, with few exceptions. In the winter, there was a heavy rain event here east of Austin into eastern Williamson County. And then this spring, there were a couple of storms that brought some above normal rainfall to portions of Valverde County, and then to southern Dimmitt and a little sliver of Maverick counties as well. But again, on the whole, much drier than normal over the past 3 and 6 months. And so that, of course, has led to a continued expansion of and worsening of drought, as was expected. Now more than 70% of South Central Texas is in either extreme or exceptional drought. And this is the highest coverage of extreme or exceptional drought in South Central Texas since we were on our way out of the 2011 drought in January of 2012. What little non-drought area exists here is likely to fill in over the course of the next couple of weeks with continued expectation for well above normal temperatures and no clear signals for appreciable rainfall. Significant relief, unfortunately, looking unlikely this summer, barring any tropical systems. We'll talk a few more details here in a moment. So speaking of 2011, here's a look at where the drought status is across the state of Texas now versus this time in 2011. And clearly the drought is not quite as extreme across the state. Certainly in portions of South Central Texas, it's been similarly warm and dry. And in fact, some portions of our area have been even warmer so far over the past 6 weeks than it was in 2011. What can we say about this summer? Well, we'll go into more details here in just a moment. It will be hot, maybe as hot as 2011, but that would really be a tough task, in part due to the slightly less extreme drought across the state, and in part just because of how extremely hot 2011 was in South Central Texas through the summer months and into the early fall. So looking ahead, these are our climatological values for our area here. So this is sort of what you can expect on average. We've certainly exited our primary severe weather season. We do still see a decent amount of straight line wind damage reports in the month of June, but obviously the pattern has been a drier one this year. And flash flooding reports remain sort of the highest instance of severe weather in South Central Texas through the summer. In terms of average rainfall, we're on the downswing already halfway through June. July is one of the drier months across the area, especially for Austin. And then, later in the summer, we do start to see average rainfall pick up as we head through tropical season and then into our fall rainy season as we start to get more, fronts and weather systems dipping further south into our region. Average temperatures still on the upclimb. Mid-June, Austin's average high is about 93, 94. We've seen, almost every day this month above that mark. And average highs climb all the way up into early August. They max out in Austin, for example, at 99 before the slow descent through the fall into the winter. Over the short term, it does look like through the end of June, we are expecting a continuation of these above to well above normal temperatures, at least over the course of the next week to 10 days. Leaning drier than normal as well. The signal kind of weakens as we head towards the end of June, but still at least a little bit of a chance for drier than normal conditions to continue through the end of the month. And then in the longer term, here's one of our long-term climate models, the climate forecast system. And this is what it currently thinks our temperature anomaly, or the difference from the average, will look like for July through September. Certainly weaker than some of the anomalies this model has shown for the last couple of these webinars I've given, but still a weekly positive temperature anomaly expected, warmer than normal conditions on average in the July through September period. Although not shown here, these anomalies increase later this year into the fall and winter in this model, and I'll talk a little bit about why in just a moment. A multi-model ensemble that does include the CFS, but a number of other longer-term climate scale model information is a little bit more bullish on above normal temperatures in that July through September period, especially over northern portions of our area. The probabilities of above normal are maybe a little lower than we've seen, only 40 to 50% calibrated probabilities for July through September for our area, but certainly leaning continued warmer than normal conditions, especially with how dry the soils are in our area, how much of the sun's energy is likely to go into heating the ground, rather than evaporating any soil moisture. In terms of the precipitation, the CFS model has, again, a bit of a weaker signal, but still leaning in that drier than usual category, lower than normal confidence. And then the multi-model ensemble is, again, a little bit more confident than that single model, thinking there may be at least some continued drier than normal conditions across much of South Central Texas. Now, what does the Climate Prediction Center think? They, of course, take into account more than just long-term models, but also soil moistures and other possible impacts. It does look like for the month of July, definitely looking at likely, sorry about the low resolution on this, 50 to 60% chance of above normal temperatures in the month of July for much of Texas. And, equal chances for most of our area for below, near, or above normal precipitation. And I think the reason that this isn't leaning below is just kind of hedging bets on the chance. It's a low chance, but a chance for some potential, tropical moisture to eventually work its way into the area. Looking on the longer term here, the seasonal outlook for that July through September period, you can see that the trends are just a little lower, only a 40 to 50% chance of above normal temperatures during that period. And again, equal chances of, below normal, near normal, or above normal precipitation this summer into the early fall. Unfortunately, in the short term, no clear signals for any rain for our area, but we'll keep crossing our fingers to see something here. Ideally not, a stronger tropical system with other impacts, but just some nice soaking rains is what we're all asking for. So let's talk about the tropics a little bit. While the impacts of the ENSO cycle, or El Nino and La Nina, typically have waned by the spring, this year, sea surface temperatures in the tropical eastern Pacific have actually cooled in the spring. And although likely to be refined at least somewhat, the March, April, May Oceanic Nino Index, which is one of the main ways that we kind of track El Nino and La Nina, is really the coolest since 1950, which is the first year that we really started tracking this information. Sea surface temperatures cooled in the spring this year for one of the first times ever. And as a result of that, chances have increased for La Nina to continue for a third straight year into this winter. While only 60%, there is still some possibility of neutral conditions. It does look rather likely, and I would go so far as to say, El Nino is probably not happening this year. We'll see how things turn out, but right now, leaning in the direction of a third straight year of La Nina, which has only happened twice before in the 72 years of records that we have. And this is just a sort of a map to show you what I'm talking about when I talk about the tropical eastern Pacific. This is a map of sea surface temperature anomalies. So that's the difference from the normal values for this time of year. And in the eastern Pacific, clearly still cooler than normal on average, even here all the way into mid-June, which is somewhat unusual. And so what could that mean for our Atlantic hurricane season? Well, if we do see a La Nina, the typical influence is for a more active than normal hurricane season in the Atlantic Basin. Now, this doesn't necessarily guarantee impacts to Texas, but weaker vertical wind shear typically occurs in this region through the season when we're in a La Nina, and atmospheric stability is less, which sort of allows more of those tropical thunderstorms to develop and eventually grow upscale into tropical systems. This graph kind of shows the climatological Atlantic Basin season. So here we are here in mid-June. The season officially started on June 1st. These arrows here show the outlook. So the first one, which will be on the next slide, came out several weeks ago, and they do update the outlook once here in early August. So be on the lookout for that. But the season really ramps up after August 1st and then maximizes in early September before sort of slowly, coming back down through the fall months. Now here in Texas, our season does sort of, end a little bit earlier than the Atlantic Basin as a whole, but, we'll certainly be on the lookout for the chances of any tropical activity over the course of the next several months into the early fall. So here's the official NOAA outlook. It does call for a 65% chance of another above normal season, and this is pretty familiar to all of us. We've seen this pretty frequently over the course of the last several years. They do expect anywhere from 14 to 21 named storms, 6 to 10 hurricanes, and 3 to 6 major hurricanes. And again, this says nothing about landfall potential. This is just the entire Atlantic Basin storms, including the Gulf of Mexico. But some research has shown that in these high activity eras, like the one that we are in now, the vast majority of the increase relative to lower activity periods does come along the Atlantic coast. There is some increase along the Gulf Coast, still looking at the potential for a higher than normal chance of Gulf Coast tropical impacts. But in general, we see a much larger increase in impacts along the Atlantic coast, well off to our east. Switching gears a little bit, just talk a little bit about where we're at in terms of fire weather and soil moisture. Very low soil moistures are in place after all of the heat we've seen and the distinct lack of rainfall CPC's soil moisture anomaly has us under the first percentile over most of our area. Although this is sort of a smooth and broad brushed graphic, some satellite products do paint a slightly less dire picture. This one is from NASA Sport Land Information Systems. And you can see some of the areas that picked up some decent rainfall. Southern, Dimmitt and Maverick, and then northern Valverde are, near normal for their soil moistures right now. But, a good portion of the area is below the 10th percentile and even below the 5th percentile. And this is for 0 to 100 centimeter soil moisture depth. And keep in mind, this is an experimental product, but I do think it's a little bit more realistic for at least deeper soil moisture in some of those areas, very isolated areas, but some areas did indeed pick up some much needed rainfall this spring. In terms of fire weather, it had been active, earlier in the spring. We had a little bit of a break, and then now this past week or two, we've had a few more fire starts and spreads across south central Texas. And you can see that the energy release components from the Texas A&M Forest Service in some portions of our region are nearing record values for this time of year. Now these regions, I'll show you here, do extend outside of our coverage area. The South Texas region, Western Hill Country, Eastern Hill Country does extend north of our coverage area, and then the same goes for Central Texas. But those areas, especially south and then in the Hill Country, very dry. There has been a little bit more rain over far eastern portions of our area this year, so not quite as dire over our northeastern counties. And that shows up in the KBDI values as well, although I don't have that shown here. Although the latest weekly fire potential outlook from TFS does state that this continued pattern will likely lead to progressively decreasing fuel moistures through the middle of next week, and that could lead to an increase in fire activity across portions of Texas again. And then in the longer term, the National Interagency Fire Center outlooks do kind of keep near normal significant wildland fire potential in our region through August, but that does increase to above normal across all of south central Texas by September. So just to wrap up, we do expect lower than normal chances for heavy rain leading to flash flooding or riverine flooding. I also didn't show it here, but pardon me, 7-day stream flows across our region are all below the 25th percentile in the below to well below normal category. And of all the basins west of US 281, most of those are below the 10th percentile. Now that's not to say we couldn't see flooding. All it really takes is one big event, and we can fill up the reservoirs and the rivers could flood. But there's no clear signs for anything like that occurring in the near future, and it would likely take a tropical event at this point over the next couple of months to lead to any flooding concerns. More concerning is the chance for a tropical system to impact us, as I discussed. No guarantee, but certainly a slightly elevated risk. Fire weather, continued higher than normal with how dry it's been, especially as we head into fall. If we don't see any significant rainfall, once we get back into the season when fronts and windier conditions, and drier air work their way back into our region, could be another worrisome fire weather season if we're not able to pick up some significant rainfall through the summer. And excessive heat already been an issue. That seems pretty likely to continue. Above normal temperatures and above normal heat impacts across our region. And lastly, I do really quickly before I get to your questions, just want to point out, I recently revamped, now that we're in pretty extreme drought, a drought brochure that we put out on our website. And so on our website, if you go to weather.gov/EWX under climate and past weather, we do have a drought web page with some drought information. And of course, I'm loading pretty slowly here. Right here, our latest local drought brochure. I just updated this yesterday evening. I've put it together in a little bit of a new format with as much information as I could find. But if any of you who do care about drought information and drought impacts have any thoughts about this, anything you'd like to see on it, I do welcome input. I want this to be as useful as possible for all of our partners. So you all have my contact information and also our webmaster email. I do welcome input. Please go and check that out if that's something you are interested in. So with that, I'll take a look and see if any of you have any questions. Please enter those in the chat box. One has already come in. When did the drought that started in 2011 end? Well, it really didn't start to wane until the late fall, early winter of 2011, and we were still in pretty severe drought, extreme to exceptional, all the way, through January and into February. There's actually a time series you can look at on the Drought Monitor website that can kind of show you where things were. That was certainly the last time that we saw drought this extreme in South Central Texas. And even though 2011 into 2012 was a La Nina year, just like the one that we're potentially heading into, they did see some above normal rainfall that fall and winter. So while La Nina would continue to tilt our odds towards warmer and drier than normal conditions, should it materialize this fall and winter, it does not guarantee that, and we'll all be crossing our fingers for maybe a repeat of that, winter 2011-2012 to get us out of this drought. Ideally, we'll get out of it sooner, but no guarantees there. Is Arctic melt causing the cooling in the Pacific, or Antarctic melt causing the cooling in the Pacific? I'm not personally aware of any connections there. That's not to say that there aren't any, but really that those Pacific sea surface temperature changes are part of a naturally occurring cycle. The ENSO, El Nino Southern Oscillation cycle is a naturally occurring cycle, but it is irregular. It's not a guarantee. There's no way of saying 2 years in advance what that cycle is going to do. Certainly unusual, but not unheard of for us to potentially see 3 years in a row of La Nina. But research doesn't necessarily know exactly how the ENSO cycle is going to fare in our changing climate over time. So over the upcoming few decades, we will likely continue to learn more about that. Sorry, I don't have a better answer to your question, Charles. So right now there are no other questions. I'll leave it up here for another minute or two just to make sure. But thank you all for joining me today. Again, if you have any questions, please feel to reach out to me. Here's my contact information, keith.white@noaa.gov. Let's see here. Can you give the URL for the drought brochure again? So that site is at www.weather.gov, and then you can do /Austin or /San Antonio, or even just /EWX, and then /drought, or you can access it from that drop down on our homepage under climate and past weather. Parts of central and southern Burnett County appear to be in exceptional drought status. Are there provisions for this status? I'm not sure what that question means, James. If you wouldn't mind clarifying a little bit, do you mean like, water resource management? Are there any, are you asking if there's any, water restrictions or something like that? I'll stand by while you, type in a clarification. Will the slides be available? Yes, I will be emailing out the slides and a recording of this presentation sometime later today. Tank and pasture conditions. We don't keep a whole lot of track of that kind of stuff. I know, the Texas A&M AgriLife website does have some of the, agricultural impacts of drought. They issue that weekly for most of the year, and we do put some of that information into our text-based DGT or drought information statement. I don't have that currently included in the brochure itself, but that is something I would consider adding, especially if folks would like to see that there as well. Let's see here. Another question, how about the amount of water the new Samsung facility will use and supposedly recycle or purify before putting it into Brushy Creek? Unfortunately, I can't speak to any of that. I have no knowledge of that situation, and most of that kind of stuff is kind of handled on a city or county level. I'd certainly recommend reaching out to some officials there. I'm not really privy to that sort of information. Let's see, is the Saharan dust worse this year, and how long will it impact Central Texas? I wouldn't necessarily say it's worse. Right now, today is certainly bad. If you look out your window or you've been outside today, it's quite hazy. But this is something we see nearly every year at this time of year. The season really picks up in June and can continue through as late as August. It's kind of difficult to say whether or not it's worse than any other year. Certainly today it's on the worst end of the spectrum, but I certainly remember seeing this kind of Saharan dust activity in the past 2 years myself. All right, one more here. How many times on record has La Nina lasted 4 years in a row? It has not. It has never lasted 4 years in a row. I highly doubt that would happen. Even if we do see it continue through this third year here, it would be pretty unprecedented. I'm not saying it won't happen, but the chances are certainly that it is unlikely to occur. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. I do appreciate everybody's kind words and thanks. With that, I will end the presentation, but as always, if you have any additional questions, concerns, comments, I'd love to hear some feedback on this presentation, on the drought materials, anything you got. So thank you all again for attending, and have a good weekend.